Hi, everyone. This is Virginia Stanley from HarperCollins Library Marketing Department. I'm here with my colleagues, Chris Connolly and Lainey Mays, and we're really excited to have two very special guests with us today on Door to Door. Today, we have the honor of speaking with Alice Randall, New York Times bestselling author of several novels, including The Wind Done Gone, Pushkin and the Queen of Spades, Rebel Yell, and Ada's Rules. She's also the first African-American woman to co-write the #1 country hit X's and O's, which celebrates Aretha Franklin. Over 20 of Ms. Randall's songs have been recorded, including several top 10 and top 40 records. She's the co-author of the acclaimed cookbook Soul Food Love, which won the NAACP award, as well as the young adult novel The Diary of B.B. Bright, Possible Princess, which received the Phyllis Wheatley Award. Her new book, Black Bottom Saints, which goes on sale August 18th, pays tribute to Detroit's legendary neighborhood, a mecca for jazz, sports, and politics. It's a powerful blend of fact and imagination, reminiscent of E.L. Doctorow's classic novel Ragtime and Marlon James's Man Booker award-winning masterpiece, A Brief History of Seven Killings. Dr. Tia Miles MacArthur Genius is the author of The Dawn of Detroit and professor of history at Harvard University, writes, Black Bottom Saints is a tour de force, a toast to a mystical, gritty place, a tableau of Black arts and culture centering on Detroit City. Within these finely crafted and luminous pages that readers will never want to leave, Randall has resurrected a lost glitter here. Detroit's original and best Black neighborhood, with its brilliant, yearning, brave, maddening, and ultimately mortal residents, bursts to colorful life in a flash of incomparable style. This is a ritual calling forth the blazing spirits of bygone breadwinners, reminding Detroiters and all Black Americans that once upon a time we did it. Welcome, Alice. Now I will introduce Patrik Bass, who is an award-winning journalist and a senior editor at Amistad Books, working most recently with author Bakari Sellers on his memoir, My Vanishing Country. Patrik was the books editor at Essence magazine for 18 years, where he worked with a wide range of writers, including Isabel Wilkerson, Rita Dove, Maya Angelou, Colin Powell, and Terry McMillan. He's the author of 3 books, Like a Mighty Stream, The March on Washington, August 28, 1963, The 0 Degree Zombie Zone, and he's the co-author of In Our Own Image. He's lectured widely on African-American culture and is an adjunct professor at Syracuse University. Patrik has been helping people tell their stories for more than 25 years, and he's helped Alice Randall do just that as the editor of her book, Black Bottom Saints. Welcome, Alice and Patrik. Thank you so much for being part of this today.
Well, thank you, Virginia. And Alice, thank you so much for just being here and also for writing this gift of a book, Black Bottom Saints. I have to tell you, it was such an honor to have worked on this masterpiece with you. And so to everyone watching us right now, could you tell us about the title?
The title?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Black Bottom Saints. Black Bottom, you all know Harlem, which is New York's first great Black neighborhood. You know Bronzeville, maybe, Chicago's first great Black neighborhood. But equal and rivaling both of those is Black Bottom, Detroit's first major Black neighborhood, which at one point had 80% Black home ownership and would become home to the largest collection of Black girls ever living in one city in America, as far as we know, or perhaps the world. And the Saints, what made Black Bottom great was the people, their chin up, defiant attitude. They are the saints, the secular, living, everyday saints from the street and the gutter and the pulpit, the Black Bottom Saints. That's why that's the name of this book. It's about this great neighborhood that belongs to all America and the people who are part of this sacred secular.
Right, and holding it all together, the connective tissue, the spirit of the book is Ziggy Johnson. Can you tell us about Mr. Johnson, please.
First of all, I love Ziggy, but let me stop and say, I love my editor, Patrik Henry Bass. I'm going to go back to Ziggy Johnson, but I've got to stop and say, when Patrik was at Essence, with all those big people like Maya Angelou and Terry McMillan, he also reviewed every one of my books. That starts 20 years ago with The Wind Done Gone. That continued through the others. And he gave some of the most thoughtful, insightful reviews I had every time. So when Patrik left Essence to come on to Amistad, which is the foremost publisher of Black and multicultural voices in the world, I knew where I had to go. I only wanted to try to go one place, and lucky enough, Marie Brown got it for me. Patrik Henry Bass at Amistad. And I have to tell him too, I teach the 0 Degree Zombie Zone at Vanderbilt in my course on Black children's literature, but that's another story. On this one, this book, Ziggy Johnson, Ziggy, it's told in his voice, Ziggy is the person who inspired me to want to be a writer. And when it came time to tell his story, I care about it more than any story I've ever told. Because inside of Ziggy's story are 52 stories. I thought, it turned out it was 61. But inside of Ziggy's story was 52. So who was Ziggy Johnson, aside from the person who inspired me to want to be a writer? He was a man born in 1913 in Chicago, a Black man who was born in Chicago in 1913 in Bronzeville. He died in Motown in 1968. And in between, he did 3 amazing things. He was a leading Black entertainment journalist for the Michigan Chronicle, in a tradition of Black journalists that goes back to the 19th century that so gets forgotten. The Chicago Defender, the Pittsburgh Courier, so many papers that are no longer existing. So he's a journalist. He is also an MC in the hottest clubs of the most famed and fabled Black clubs and American clubs, the Flame Show Bar, the 20 Grand. So he's an MC, he's a columnist, but what does he do that none of the others do? He founds an inner city, a center city dance school. But it's not just, as he said, and one of his saints is Sammy Davis. He said, I knew the little genius Sammy Davis. We didn't need a dancing school. I know Bubbles and Buck to learn to dance. His dancing school is about the same thing his being an entertainment columnist was about, and his being an MC, creating dangerous citizens. Citizens who can be political, who can fight the establishment while entertaining the hard-winning breadwinners. That's what Ziggy was about every day of his life, uplifting and overturning. And so that's who Ziggy Johnson was, a man who used dance, cocktails, a dancing school, an entertainment, a gossip column, and his stage at the Flame Show Bar to make America a better place for everyday Black people from every echelon of Black society. When I walked into his dancing school when I was 3 years old, I knew immediately the thing Ziggy cared about most was Black girls, and the thing he cared about second most was Black language, and I fell in love with Ziggy.
Well, and people are going to fall in love with this book, and thank you for your kind words, Alice. After this is my second year at Amistad, and HarperCollins, but after my first year, I went to see the Toni Morrison documentary, Pieces of Me. And I was just, my heart was full, and this was after her unfortunate passing. And I remember what she did at Random House with Tony K. Bombara and Gail Jones and Angela Davis and Lucille Clifton. And no one had ever seen them before. Like, she literally said that that Black women having not maleness to fall back on or whiteness to fall back on invented themselves. And so what she did, she created categories that can never be replicated. You can never replicate a Gail Jones or Toni K. Bombara, because what they so uniquely brought to language, they sort of pushed the boundaries of language. And that's what drew me to Black Bottom Saints. So I thank you for that, because I didn't want to edit anything safe. I wanted something that would challenge me and that would challenge readers in all types of illuminating ways. And you've done that. You've done that over time, Alice. So thank you. And speaking of that, this is an extremely ambitious novel. When we were in the early stages of it, I would read it, and it was almost like, the gymnast, who does like the five, it's like, was she going to hit? Is she going to land? And you did, each time. And I love that, throughout the editing process in which Marie Brown, who is Alice's agent, who is a legendary editor at Doubleday in her own right, and certainly a force as an agent. So we all worked on it together, and I welcome that input, because Marie is she has such an ear for language and attention to detail, and so it was great. It was almost like we were all doing a dance together, like Lindy Hoppers almost.
Black Bottom.
Yeah. So tell me about tell the viewers, everyone attending, about the structure of Black Bottom Saints and why that structure was so necessary to this narrative.
Well, it's a really radical narrative structure. And again, thank you, Patrik, for being open to that and celebrating that. It's 52 interconnected chapters at its simplest, divided into 4 seasons. One of the things I said, we're not all born on January 1. You can enter this novel where you want to. If you wanted to start with Joe Louis or Night Train Lane, you start there. I have young readers all across the country who are getting to see this book early. They're all going straight to Tanya Blanding, a Black young woman who was killed in the summer of '67 in her home while she was hiding under a dining room table by National Guardsmen. If you want to, you can start with Laverne Baker. You start where the story invites you in, and you continue, just like you're born on any day of the year, and you continue in that structure, or you can start with Robert Hayden, where we start you off. So number 1 is we work to create 52 chapters that work independently, but also mount, we think beautifully if you read them in the order we've created them. But so that's one of the ways in which the novel is so different, and it gives homage to the Saints Day books. One of the things that's interesting about Ziggy is his mama is from Mississippi, from the oldest Black Catholic congregation in the South, in Natchez. He grew up a cradle to grave Catholic. He knows the traditional Catholic Saints Day book, and he audaciously takes down all those inherited saints and raises up all these Black people, from poet laureate Robert Hayden to Scatterbrain Stevens. Scatterbrain was the precursor, the model for Superfly. He is a heroin dealer who wants to be a restaurateur, who wants to get into a different life. He wants to leave that behind. Scatterbrain's humanity, Scatterbrain's genius is celebrated in this book, because one of the things we love about this book and this forum, each chapter has its own aesthetics and ethics, because there's not one Black life that matters. All Black lives matter. Scatterbrain, the heroin dealer, deserves to live too. And there are things we can learn from him, but we also can learn from Robert Hayden. We don't learn the same things from both of them, and we don't have them each speaking in the exact same language. So we've got a book with an overarching aesthetic, but also that's celebrating 52 different voices, somewhat like Winesburg, Ohio, somewhat like Spoon River Anthology, somewhat like the Japanese film, The Last Seven Samurai. I've been influenced by multiple texts to create this multi-text narrative, but that ambitious novel, but it takes you, the seasons take us through an important sequence. The book starts off in summer. Summer, you lead into fall. So that's the root time. The Saints of the Night resilience, we start off with that. The Saints of fall is when you're losing everything. It's everything coming back against Black people, everything attacking us, all the adversity. Then in winter, we're laying in the cut, we're getting ready, we're growing our strength. That's the deepest roots of Black resilience, are in the winter saints. And then spring, it's just pure bloom time. Those moments where we just hit it big against all odds. That's how the book, we end in this triumphant moment. And of course, that means Ziggy is the last saint of all, because he's the biggest star in my book.
Right. In so many ways, I mean, Black Bottom Saints is, like all of your previous novels, inventive in a category of its own. But it does, for me, for fiction, in a way, what George Plimpton and Gene Stein did with Edie, the story of Edie Sedgwick, the Andy Warhol superstar. But it was about Edie, but it was about so much more. It really was about America. And it was an oral history in the way that it was told. But I find Black Bottom Saints, there's emotion on every page in such a good way. You've had positive feedback already for Publishers Weekly and Kirkus. And I always get nervous when I see a Kirkus in an email. When the publicist sends me Kirkus, I'm like, oh God. And I think that they got it. They really did, because the emotion on the page are a range of emotions. It's not emotional. There are emotions. It's a big-hearted book. And I think I'm not giving anything away by letting people know at the very beginning of the book that Ziggy is dying at Kirkwood Hospital, which is an all-Black hospital in Detroit. And the exhaustive research that you've done with this novel, Alice, I mean, you had to have spent a year or two or more in libraries pulling all of this. And there are nuggets on every page that you wouldn't. When Maria and I sat down with it, we were like, how did she know that? How did she, I mean, it's just what Dr. Miles said. It's just a tour de force of exhaustive, deep research and meaning, and it feels accessible. It feels extremely accessible. So anyone, it doesn't matter where you are in life, you can come into Black Bottom Saints and feel connected to each and every one of those quote unquote characters.
Well, one of the things I want to thank all the librarians out there. This book could not exist without libraries. This book was, in some sense, it started to gestate in libraries, because I said I met Ziggy when I adventuresome editor, a brave editor like Patrik. When you're a Black woman, Black women don't get to fifth novels. But
hey, Alice, can I just interrupt for 1 second? You just froze for a second, and I'd love for you to say where you met Ziggy. Then you just froze for a second, and I think that's really critical.
I said I met Ziggy in libraries, because when I met Ziggy, as I said, this is my fifth novel. You don't get to a fifth novel without a courageous editor like Patrik if you're a Black woman, if you're writing literary fiction. So these Q&As happen, and people ask, who is your favorite, who inspired you to want to be a writer? And normally I would say, for my first 4 books, I always answer Zora Neale Hurston. But the more I thought about it as I got older, and I'm 61 years old now, I realized I wanted to be a writer since before I knew Zora Neale Hurston. I wanted to be a writer since I was about 4 years old. And the only writer I knew when I was 4 years old was Ziggy Johnson, writing for the Michigan Chronicle. My daddy did not read. My daddy was a street man from Detroit City. He did not read to me from children's books, but he read to me every day. And what he read to me aloud was the Michigan Chronicle. And I fell in love with Ziggy's language. And I wanted to be a writer from 4 years old. So when I started thinking of me to want to be a writer, I started telling people about this. And they kept on telling me, Ziggy was not an entertainment columnist. They would talk about, they never remembered, because the Michigan Chronicle has not been archived, digitally archived yet, the old ones. No one remembered Ziggy's columns. Everyone told me I was confusing him with somewhere else. So I went into a library and I called on my librarian women friends, and they found me and helped me track down microfilm that had been done sometime in the late 60s, early 70s of early issues of the Michigan Chronicle. And I spent, Patrik, no, it was 2 hot summers in the basement of an archive library, scrolling through microfilm, taking pictures, page by page when I finally found the columns. 1948, 49, 50, 51. It turns out almost 20 years in a variety of newspapers, that old microfilm. I finally had 1,000 photographs to look through. I get those Xerox. That took maybe a whole other summer. And then I start reading through it, making lists of who is Ziggy writing about the most, who does he care about. I actually found my birth announced in 1959 in one of Ziggy's columns.
Wow.
I was in the bottom of a library. It meant even more to me. This is not an autobiographical novel. This is a community biography about all these other people. But you may guess from reading some of my other novels, I had an abusive mother. I had not a good mother. What I had on my side, aside from Ziggy and my daddy and a community, were libraries and librarians. I am very much literally a person that libraries mamaed. Libraries were my safe space. A library that was down the block to me in 2 different communities is where I would go and find my safe space, find shelter, find voices that cared about me, find poems that I could hide in when I had to go back to a house that wasn't safe. So I love libraries, and I mean that. That's why Sadie Pryor may be my very favorite saint, because she's a librarian. But getting back to—
No, Alice, I could talk about libraries forever. I grew up in a very, very, very small town in North Carolina, Laurinburg, where there's the famous Laurinburg Institute that Dizzy Gillespie and Sam Jones went to. And beside it was a library that for me as a child, I thought it was a mansion, but it was like no bigger than a 1-bedroom house. And we would go to that library in the summer because it had the coolest water at their water fountain, and my grandmother and grandfather, they had the whole thing, either you stay in or you stay out. You can only come to the screen door once, right? And if you had to stay in, you had to clean up and do chores. And so we would leave and go to the library, and that's where my love of reading began. It's right there with Ms. McLean, with her glasses, with the chain on them and all of that. So yeah, her bun hairdo, and just such an angel, such an angel.
And I love starting in one corner and going across back and forth. So this book, so it was about 3 years of original research. I've used the History Makers Archive, which I love, the online archive of digital Black life. I've used Google extensively to get into all kinds of archives, but I've created a library. Unfortunately, my own home library involves probably well over 5,000 or 6,000 books. So I used, as increasingly digitized versions of old Black newspapers. The Lynette Dobson story was an interesting one to chase down. And she had been, just to say one thing about Lynette Dobson, the first Black woman to ever dance with an American president at an inaugural ball, and a great club woman and national leader. But I noticed she'd been multiply married early on in ways that you might not have expected. And so I started tracking down her story in Black newspapers research, finding out that her father died on the 4th of July in front of her, that she was witness to and involved in the drowning death of her father. All of this research, tracking down Ziggy Saints, was years. So there was probably about almost 7 years of research on this book and 3 years of writing. Thank God I got a sabbatical year from Vanderbilt to actually just immerse myself in this. Thank God Marie and Patrik willing to read draft after draft. This is a book that there are literally 42 real drafts of this. There are some saints who didn't finally make it in, but I want to go back to something Patrik said at the very beginning for 1 second, is Ziggy is writing the book, the fictional Ziggy, in the last months of 1967 and the first 2 months of 68. He is on bed rest in Kerwood, a Black-owned hospital. So he's experiencing this lockdown that the whole country is experiencing right now. And Ziggy is a role model for COVID crazy and COVID times, because he is an example of how vigorous you can be and how hard it is to be vigorous when you're locked down. but how essential imagination and conversations and memory are when you lock down. So it's wild that I wrote this novel that I started really writing 10 years ago, 4 years ago, about a 4-month lockdown, and now we're living one. More even wild is, I was writing about 1967, a summer that what gets Ziggy wanting to die almost is the fires of 67, the racism that's being confronted, not that it's coming back, rearing its ugly head, the ruptures that are becoming so evident again in 67, and the specific death of Tanya Blanding. Ziggy is falling out of love with life, but before he dies, and he's also sick, he wants to put in a one treasure trove, this Saints Day book, everything that Black women and girls, everything that broken people will need to get from where they are to where they want to go. He wants to put this treasure trove of hidden wisdom in the vault, and the vault is his Saints Day book.
Yes, and one of our earliest conversations when we were talking about the novel, and I was telling you that one of so many impressive literary techniques that you hone and then take to higher heights was there are a lot of well-known bold-faced names who appear throughout the novel, like Dinah Washington and Nat King Cole, and I love how you and Laverne Baker, my God, she'll break your heart, viewers, she'll break your heart. That viewers will know, they'll know who they are. But you made them not small, but you made them feel relatable, which I think is tremendous. But then you take people like Lynette and others and Tanya, and they become larger than life figures who are important to history. And I just think that it's really not a question. It's really just a huge compliment, because I've never seen Dinah Washington vulnerable ever. Just, and then the vulnerability of Laverne Baker and the fact that people will have a chance to get to know more about her, and the incident that happens to Nat King Cole, I don't want to spoil it for people, but that was also a humanizing event as well for Mr. Cole.
I love to see that Laverne Baker card for one moment, because one of the things that we talked about together, Patrik, and was which saint has to be in.
Yes.
And Laverne Baker was in every version of this book. And she's sort of both the high and the low, because maybe you know Laverne Baker's name, maybe you don't. She should be very famous. She was the second woman, period, not Black woman, to go into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But the truth is, most people in music don't even know her. But to Ziggy, she wasn't that big star that goes into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with these gigantic concerts at the end of her life when she's celebrated. Ziggy, and we see the inside of her when she first arrives in Chicago, and she is performing on stages with Billie Holiday and people in satin and silk, in dungarees, in a straw hat, in overalls. And she's performing by choice as Little Miss Sharecropper, because she wants to shout out and honor everybody left behind, down behind the cotton curtain in Mississippi. She was that radical, unknown Black woman who had the courage to be in sharecropper clothes. So to shout out to who was left behind. And then she goes through a whole part of her life in which she's making these amazing songs that will get her in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But her songs are then being covered by white artists, particularly Georgia Gibbs, and they're literally just stealing her inflection, stealing her sound, stealing her genius, and selling it as their own. And she fights in the courts, but when she can't win because things are stacked against her legally, she leaves this country. She refuses to be stolen from, moves to the Philippines, and she is entertaining Black, white, and Asian service people and others in the Philippines on her own terms. loved by Ziggy. He's celebrating how far she gets away, and he's predicting one of his girls will one day get to meet her. Well, in real life, most of this book is not true. It's fictional about my life, but I did get to meet the real life Laverne Baker in the Philippines as a young State Department wife. And it's just wild.
And Alice, these cards that you are showing, these are actual cards, correct?
Yes, we actually have, although not released to the public. There may be some. Follow us on Instagram at Ms. Alice Randall, and on Twitter. Join the Black Bottom Saints Facebook page, because there are just a small number, 110 of these decks of cards. But there may be some competitions and there may be more, but they are actually playing cards. You can actually engage the whole novel by our cards. So we do actually have some playing cards, and there may be some actual giveaways or contests that they become available, and we may have a larger selection of them. One of the cool things about the book is an aesthetic of the book is it addresses all 5 senses. That's something I learned from Ziggy. He learned it from church, that he learned it in the show bars. So, but the book is that way too, because Patrik, we haven't told one of the biggest secrets of the book yet. 56 recipes, cocktail.
Yeah, oh, the cocktail recipes.
You read this book, but this is not a book the same way I told you for right now. And I really want to stop in librarians. Patrik talked about how single moms get her because it gives a place for their children to be paid attention to.
Okay, Alice, you froze right there, and we want to get that. What did you just say? Patrik talked about.
Patrik was speaking about how he had shelter in the summers in libraries. And I want to say, I shout out to libraries because they're sheltering homeless people in America today. They shelter single mothers who don't have a place, good childcare for their child. It provides structure for the mama and the kids. It shelters students. So we get to address all the senses. So libraries are a sheltering place. And this book is a sheltering place, but it's an address to all 5 senses, because we're going to have Spotify playlist, which we're going to start putting the first one up late this afternoon. You'll see they'll be coming through the whole way. If you make the drinks, and the drinks include totally alcohol-free drinks, as well as there are cocktail libations, we'll get to that, but we've got lots of non-alcoholic drinks in here. Through the cocktails, you have the taste, the scent, and the feel of Black Bottom. And then we get the sound through our playlist, and through our beautiful cards, you've got the sight of Black Bottom. We're going to be putting up a virtual museum right around the time of book launch. So we are going to address all 5 senses of the book. I hope some of these alcoholic mocktails, if we ever get out of COVID crazy. But all of these cocktails are things that are easy to do at home with grocery store ingredients and are very inexpensive, relatively speaking. And so we are.
And you made all of those cocktails, right? These are tried and true tested cocktails, right?
These are tried and true, and they're rooted in another saint, Thomas Bullock, who's one of our saints, who published a cocktail book in about 1917. And Thomas Bullock's The Ideal Bartender, which is in a lot of libraries. Our books are variations and riffs. They talk back to those, and they are very much of the time period, which includes that we have the non-alcoholic cocktails. Some people call those mocktails or some other words. We call them sobertinis. I like sober. And we've got one called the Clean and Sober. That's a wonderful one. The color girl in the book, she drinks Althea Gibson's because her daddy says she's not drinking anything that's called a Shirley Temple. And so we've got some really great mocktails that make a lot of sense. And I did test them all, and I've tested them with outstanding bartenders from all over the country. And we're going to see some of those variations. On our Instagram, you'll be seeing cocktails and mocktails on Friday, and you're going to see some of the most outstanding, actually Black bartenders in this country will be shaking up some history for you.
Right. I can't wait, you know. So in terms of the narrative structure of the novel as well, again, it's like Simone Biles, the gymnast. I'm like, when you think she could do 4 flips and then she lands and it's a 10. And Maria and I, we were like, you know, the leaps that she's taken and then she's making it all work. But Black Bottom Saints is also a novel within a novel in many ways.
It is, because there's Ziggy's book.
Yeah.
And then Ziggy's book, one of the little girls that he teaches in his dance school, she inherits the book. He lives it while Ziggy is dying, and he knows he's dying. He realizes he wants, and as Detroit, you've never heard of Black Bottom, because essentially after the flames of '67 and the end of the auto industry, it gets knocked down to the ground in what was called urban renewal. That was, a lot of it was Negro removal. Black Bottom has gotten destroyed. It rises in the pages of this book. That's my call to America. We got to rise Black Bottom, realize we did it before and what we had. But this narrative structure, Colored Girl inherits the book and she starts reading it and editing it and writing little how Ziggy and these saints saved her life.
Yeah.
This book speaks to those Me Too really hard moments in American life that go back way to one of the things about the plantation past, a lot of plantation rape. Black women know a lot about moving from that trauma to transcendence. So does Black culture. So it speaks, Colored Girl's story is a story of a girl who was victimized in some very all too common ways. She experienced rape and child abuse, but she moves from that trauma to new heights because she does not allow other people ultimately to have their evil define her good.
Yeah.
He calls them out as evil. We don't minimize, we call out, shout out all sins against her. But we see Colored Girl define and tell her own story. But she does it empowered by these 56 saints. And that's when I say, this is a squad. We are all up against it right now. And particularly Black people from every walk of life in America are up against it. This is a squad, and you're on COVID, you may not have access right now. We are all on more lockdown. Some of us, and I'm so proud of us, are risking our lives to go protest right now. Some of us have to stay at home and protest with their pens and their pages and other ways. We're all finding our way who's doing the good work. But here I'm sending 56 saints for you. They're not mine, they belong. Beginning, Virginia Stanley introduced us. I teasingly say that Virginia is my Tallulah Bankhead because she's that active, agile white ally who's listening, acting,
Yes.
who
Thank
is
you.
figuring out ways to be present and be in the fight.
It's an honor.
And agile allies matter. And librarians are often the agile ally. I'm going to let you read Tallulah's story to hear exactly how she does it back there. But if you notice in this card, there's Sepia Magazine, the Negro Digest. These cards are really complex. We're going to talk about that. But Tallulah Bankhead was one of Willie Mays' friends. There's weird complexities. People are a lot more that you hear the stories always told about her. When you read our Tallulah, you're going to see why Ziggy called her the woman who knew no color. And Ziggy is not a person who thinks that colorblind is a good thing.
Right.
You have to read deep into it to see what he's really saying. I'm not even going to try to tell you on this call.
Tallulah, I mean, I was delighted when I saw the very first manuscript, and I saw Tallulah Bankhead in it, because she's just such a font of anecdotes. And my grandparents loved The Big Show, the radio show that she hosted. And one legendary anecdote about Tallulah Bankhead is she didn't realize that Lillian Hellman was doing an anti-fascism play with the Little Foxes, and she said, "I just wanted a good part." Just didn't care about it.
You know, it's always that other part of the story, and we started off with that Sadie Pryor, and I told you she's a librarian. One of the other things I'm most proud of this book, and getting a sense of who Ziggy is she's a librarian. She also is a community activist and leader, a volunteer woman. She liked to wear conservative little clothes and her pearls. But you know what Sadie Pryor did? And so many librarians are hidden heroes in their community. She was in Pensacola, Florida. You never read about this before. Sadie Pryor fought to get lifeguards for the Black beaches in Pensacola. This always makes me cry. Behind the scenes, nobody knows about that. We tell the big stories about, and they're important to tell, about wading in the water and the civil rights going to beaches, that they were segregated beaches. We talk about the male part of the story, getting the beaches desegregated. No one tells the rest of that story, that once the beaches were desegregated, that nobody was making these Southern communities pay for Black lifeguards for the Black beaches. Sadie Pryor, the librarian, she was in her community. She heard that news. She heard that need. And she wore her little dress, and she went down and she lobbied without pay until those lifeguards were there. She saved lives in the library, and she saved lives in the community. She had no children of her own, but she was mama and auntie to so many. And those are the rest of those stories. And one of the things I'm hoping we can do with our Facebook community, if you follow us on Black Bottom Saints on Instagram, is shout up your stories. Who's a Sadie Pryor in your community? How are you being a Sadie Pryor? When you're not in your library, what are you activating and doing? Because I know those stories are out there. And one of the things I love about Sadie and her beaches is Ziggy loved to golf. Teddy Rhodes is another of our saints. This book celebrates Black environmentalism, another thing people don't talk about. You know, George Washington Carver, we had our George Washington Carver of Black Bottom, that got cut. This stuff is so rich, we had to cut the George Washington Carver of Black Bottom. We had to cut George Washington Carver. When you are voting George Washington Carver off the story, you know we've got some, I call it not John Henry strong, we've got Polly Ann strong. Who's stronger than John Henry? Polly Ann, his Black wife. So we've got some Polly Ann strong drinks and Polly Ann strong stories. But we did get in some of the great Black environmental stories. Sadie Pryor is one. We got a Reverend from St. Louis, who is another. We've got Teddy Rhodes and his golfing. Black people have been environmentalists since we arrived in these United States with African wisdom and Caribbean wisdom about the sacredness of land and earth and the science and art of growing things in harmony with nature, not violating nature, making love to the planet. This book celebrates that. One of the weird things in this book that Patrik let me keep was the word oath, a word that is, I think, one of the worst words in the modern bad people's English language. It stands for obsolete farm equipment. There are places in Mississippi that is the word, oath, that is being used to call Black people to this day. That what are they? Obsolete farm equipment. As far as I know, no other novel or book has ever put that word in it. We didn't even know how to spell it because it is a word being used by wealthy, powerful people who own land in Mississippi to dismiss Black people, people who wouldn't dare say the N word because that would be called out. So they hide behind this word, oath, that they let you think might mean something else until you tease it out. We are not obsolete farm equipment. Once upon a time, there was a Black Camelot. Once upon a time, there was a world of great Black audience where Black literature, science, music was being received by a Black audience in Detroit. People working on the assembly lines 24/7. So coming off to hear music and art, going to the Gotham Hotel where there's Black paintings and photography on the walls. Once upon a time, there was a Black Camelot fueled by everyday blue collar Black workers who read and listened to music, who grew up with Robert Hayden, who became the first Black poet laureate of the United States, but was born in Black Bottom. With Lloyd George Richards, another one of our saints, who was a shoe shine boy in Black Bottom with a mother who was a maid before he would become the dean of the Yale School of Drama and the person who would bring August Wilson to the world. Let us not forget the shoe shine boys of Black Bottom. We've got 3 in this book who will become great labor leaders and deans, and what they had to do when they were shoe shine boys, when people spat on them. And they never let that define who they were. And they never forgot it, and they tried to make this place a better place. And by this place, I mean this world. And I love Lin-Manuel Miranda and Hamilton. This is an all Black world, almost, in Black Bottom, to invite everyone in to see their humanity. Everyone is invited to find the saint in this book that they need and the one that reflects their best self. It's everybody's book, but it is the Blackest book I have ever written.
Oh,
No, I was just gonna say, bravo, that was it.
yeah, no, bravo for sure. That was beautiful. And you know, because of you, no one, and this book, no one will forget Black Bottom Saints. You've educated us. I mean, Alice, we spoke, you spoke at the Public Library Association's virtual conference. You were one of the 2 authors that were interviewed. And, I showed you yesterday, I still have my manuscript here. And it's just an absolutely beautiful book.
I loved that event, and I got to meet librarians from all over the country. And because of everything happened, and I'm a breast cancer survivor right now, just 20 months out, so I've had to be very careful. I am so thrilled that the last group, and maybe the only group event that I will do for this campaign in public, was with librarians from all over this country, because you're my people, and you are my best ambassadors, because you are touching the real lives of real people. You're just like me, loving literature and loving actual human beings. You are the fingers, the William Blake, mercy has a human heart, mercy has a human heart and human hands. I love that you are the hands and heart of this book as it goes into the world. And I'm counting on you to get it out there, and some of it's going to be virtual ebooks, all of these things. We're going to do this thing.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
It means so much to me that the one thing I went to was with you all. And even that weekend, it was the one thing I didn't even question not going to. And because even if it meant something with my health, I wanted to be with you. And I loved it. I love librarians. And email me. Any librarian has direct access to me. So.
Well, it was such, first of all, it was such an honor, and it was such a wonderful experience, well, first of all, to meet you, but then we were in the conference center in the exhibit hall, and then we went to the Nashville Public Library, and you just kept getting stopped everywhere we went. Everybody knew you, and people in the library knew you. That was like your second home. It was fantastic. I mean, it really was. And then the interview was just so wonderful. And as I say, was such an education for me. I love what you said about not, you don't have to, yes, of course it can be read all strung together, but every single one of these entries can be read. You can start anywhere. I love when you said yesterday, and you just said it before too, not everybody's born on January 1st. I love that. You just go in, and where you're supposed to be and who you're supposed to meet and who you're supposed to read, that's the one you'll read.
Yeah, it's like you're a little bit going in the lobby of the Gotham Hotel.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really such a journey, and it's just I don't know, there's a joy, and there's just so much information about these people. And I love what you were saying, Patrik, before about sort of like it's sort of even handed between like the celebrities and the breadwinners, the people that are working all day, and then they come home, and like one doesn't tip the scale to the other. They're all just important people.
Yeah, Black Lives Matter.
Right? Yeah, that's it. And Tallulah.
Yeah.
And I love that. I have someone said to me that it's a little like August on the Vineyard, meaning it's a lot of history and a lot of fun. This book is a lot of fun, and it's meant to be. And even the cocktails, one of the things, our culture was a piece of that world. But we've got a very important character, George Stanley, who is an alcoholic and gives up drinking. And that's a wonderful and powerful cocktail, the Clean and Sober.
Yeah.
We celebrate that. But we have actual cocktails that work as taste narratives that are metaphors.
Yeah.
We are that experimental. We don't have time to talk about that here, but the book is both, because Black joy, one of the last things I like to leave with messages, Black joy is radical. That's something Ziggy taught me. That's something, writing the book, Black joy is radical. We get to claim our Black joy even as we acknowledge our pain, our woundedness, our vulnerability, our joy, our authenticity is our strength.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, and our creativity, Alice.
Absolutely. That's the whole deep. Our right to invent ourselves, to invent lives, to imagine, because the only way, imagination, we have to imagine what freedom is and insist on our own. We have to imagine so many things, but we have, as a people, Billy Eckstine, so many geniuses, but we got geniuses from all levels. We got from the street. Genius comes in a lot of different places in this book. Genius doesn't have to do with a degree. It doesn't have to do with wealth. It doesn't even have to do with education. Genius is where you imagine authentically, and this book celebrates them all over. So thank you. I want to, in HarperCollins, Amistad, Marie Brown, all the people who were born with me, the girls of 1959, 60 of Black Detroit. When I was born in Detroit in 1959, there was about 140,000 other Black girls in Detroit that year. I was lucky to be born in a time and place that celebrated what we now call Black girl magic before we called it that. And Ziggy was thinking and insisting that Black lives matter before we had that very important phrase. I want in this moment, this book to honor all those young activists out there and to show how amazing is what they are getting accomplished, because this book shows the sweep of what we have been up against so long, all the way back to Tanya Blanding. She lived on the very same street as my cousin. I've been worrying about Tanya Blanding since 1967.
Wow. Well, you've given us a gift. You really have. was a tremendous, or as they say, Herculean effort with the research that you did, the heart and soul that went into this. It's just absolutely staggering, really. And the result is a beautiful book. Then and people who will live on the pages of that book. And then when it's read, they'll be in our hearts. So Alice, thank you.
Thank you.
And Patrik, thank you.
Oh, thank
And
you.
before now, that really, this has just been so wonderful. Really, such a unique, not only a unique relationship between author and editor, but a unique way to tell a story, Alice. And so to have you here, both of you, to talk about it is just, if it's just so fleshed out in every single way. This is lovely. It's a gift, really. Thank you so much. And so I think we're kind of wrapping up here. We've gone almost a whole hour just talking about this wonderful book. And we could keep going, but we can't. But we could. But before we go, is there anything else that either of you wants to say? I don't want to sort of log off until you sort of made sure that you've said everything you want to say.
Follow us on Instagram at Ms. Alice Randall. Follow us on Twitter because we've got some amazing things that we'll be announcing, including the free virtual museum, these playlists. We are going to give you ways to educate and support and entertain all your clients at the libraries. We're going to have lots and lots of free resources that you will be able to use in your newsletters and tweet out. We've got great additional resources in addition to the book. And see us on August 18th, launch day. We're going to be launching from Fisk virtually. So you can all be on the Fisk University campus with the ghost of the Jubilee Singers and W.E.B. Du Bois. And of course, Robert Hayden. He's the first saint in the book. He was on faculty at Fisk for 23 years. So be with us August 18th.
Awesome. August 18th is the birthday of Black Bottom Saints by Alice Randall. We'll all be there blowing out the candles and giving you a big cheer. So.
And I have nothing to say, but thank you, Alice and Virginia and Chris and Lainey, and especially thank you to all the librarians for all of the support.
Well, we will be continuing to share this, and there's so much love here in the chats, and just people can't wait to get it for their library. So there you go.
Thank you. And kisses to the librarians. First of all, that's not against any boundaries. I can't resist. I love librarians.
I guarantee you there will be no boundary issues with the kisses from you, Alice. You take good care. Everyone, thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll be back next week. So until then, be well, and thanks for watching.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye, Patrik. Goodbye, Alice.